Hello, I hope everyone is doing great today. My name is Gary Gann, and I'm a procurement counselor at Tribal Government Institute PTAC, located in Norman, Oklahoma. This webinar is a continuation of our discussion regarding DoD's Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, otherwise known as CMMC. Today's webinar is aimed towards orienting you to the requirements of FCI and CUI with respect to DFARS and NIST 800-171. I will be hosting another webinar on September 16, 2020, where I will be discussing how to handle controlled unclassified information and federal contract information. You won't have to worry about taking screenshots of the slides because I will post them on our website for you to download. I will also post a webinar video to YouTube so you can watch the webinar if you want to hear something that I said again. Our website is tgiok.com, and the on-demand video links as well as the presentation slides are located on the upcoming events page. You can also call us at 405-329-5542 if there's something that you want to talk about. Today's agenda. We're going to start with an update from the CMMC accreditation body and then go through the main topic, which is aimed at taking a closer look at federal contract information and controlled unclassified information. We'll go over a few key takeaways, and we'll have some time for questions at the end of the discussion. Most of the points of discussion today were originally presented by the director of the CMMC accreditation body. Okay, let's begin with an update regarding the CMMC accreditation body. The CMMC accreditation body is now open for business, and registrations for certified third-party assessment organizations are coming in. You can be a registered professional, a certified professional, or you can be a certified assessor. If you are interested in developing a specialized expertise within your organization, it's recommended that you be a registered professional and starting out there. Certified professionals would be those third-party consultants like DTC Global for DFARS 7012 and CMMC. Certified professionals cannot assess for the purpose of certification. However, certified professionals can assist with meeting DFARS 7012 requirements right now because that is the most important thing. There's a 92% overlap between DFARS 7012 and CMMC, so being compliant for DFARS 7012 will best position you for being ready for CMMC. And don't just hire any cybersecurity firm to help you with the requirements. You need to be confident that the firm you select knows what they are doing because rework can be expensive. Make sure whoever you select to help you with the initial assessment has the knowledge required to give you the right guidance and recommendations, because the worst outcome of the official CMMC compliance assessment would be not receiving your certification because you did not meet the requirements after a lot of time and effort was invested. Tribal Government Institute, your PTAC, plans on using DTC Global to do our initial assessment because they have members on the CMMC accreditation body, and we know for sure that they will tell us exactly what we need to do in order to be CMMC certified without trying to sell us things that we don't need. We're not affiliated with DTC Global in any way, and we will have to pay for their services, but we want to continue helping our clients, so we just have to do what we have to do at this point. The CMMC AB is currently working on a marketplace where there will be a listing of qualified assessors as they complete their training. The first provisional assessors are expected to begin training in a few weeks. The first certified assessors will be ready to begin the official CMMC compliance assessment in a few months. The mock assessments have been completed and there was mixed results. Some did well, others did not. If you're an organization that is not currently under DFARS 7012, but you think you might be impacted by CMMC level 1 because you deal with federal contract information, then you'll want to take this very seriously. The 17 level 1 controls might be considered basic cyber hygiene, but they are not all easy. They might be considered basic, but that does not mean all the level 1 controls are easy, and some of them can be difficult to fully understand. That's why we recommend reaching out for help. That way you can get the best guidance. For those organizations that are under DFAR 7012 right now, you're under the gun because you're expected to meet those requirements right now. We are 3 years past the deadline for becoming compliant with DFAR 7012. So you need to dust off your POAM, your risk and security assessment, which is an annual requirement, and update your system security plan. These documents are the foundation for meeting DFAR 7012 and CMMC requirements. So if these things are new to you, then you really are behind the curve and in urgent need of getting these documents completed. Remember, there's a 92% overlap between NIST 800-171 and the new CMMC requirements. There are important differences between NIST 800-171 and CMMC, but the differences really are negligible. When you're thinking about where to start with all of this, focus on being able to meet the requirements of DFAR 7012, which includes NIST 800-171. You really must avoid the enforcement of DFAR 7012, which has been rapidly expanding by way of the Federal False Claims Act, which is extremely serious, and there are many cases underway right now. Speaking of federal rulemaking, the rule for CMMC is currently under review and will transcend the DFAR and go to the FAR. It will be moving up. So you can expect the rule for CMMC requirement to be adopted by all federal agencies, not just DoD. The DoD contract with the CMMC accreditation body is complete, so they will be moving forward rapidly in developing the assessment criteria and the official assessment guide. The CMMC accreditation body has spent over 4,000 hours developing the assessment criteria, and it is currently being reconciled by the Department of Defense. The CMMC accreditation body is also currently working with the Program Management Office to establish the official assessment guide, which will be the definitive resource. The assessment guide is what we, as your PTAC, are excited about and waiting for so we can distribute it to all of you. We have read through the safeguards. However, the assessment guide is what is going to tell us exactly what needs to be done in order to satisfy each safeguard. We will share the assessment guide to all of our clients as soon as it becomes available. So if you wanted to get started now, where do you go? You can go to NIST 800-171A, which contains the core components of the material contained in the assessment guide. The expectation of the assessment guide is to provide detailed information for consistency and the implementation of CMMC and consistency between assessor to assessor. C3PAOs are on their way to being certified, and they will be the group that performs the official CMMC assessments. The release of the assessment guide is expected to occur towards the end of September or in the beginning of October 2020. Licensed training providers are the universities and community college and other learning institutions who train certified professionals and certified assessors. Licensed partners publishers provide the materials for the LTPs, and they are used by their certified instructors for training certified professionals and certified assessor applicants. LTPs and LPPs have not been established yet, but they should be available at some point in the near future. So If all of this is new to you, then let's go through some of the fundamentals. The federal government rolled out a program under a Department of Defense contract clause called DFARS 252-204-7012. That's where we get the name DFARS 7012 from. Now, why did they do that? They did that because controlled unclassified information, the technical data that is flowing throughout the entire defense supply chain, is at significant risk. There have been classified projects that have been hacked into and are now public knowledge. This means there is tremendous vulnerability across the defense supply chain, and the breaches have caused hundreds of billions of dollars in losses. And more importantly, our national security interests are now at stake. This ultimately impacts the legacy of our children and grandchildren, because involved in that controlled technical information is intellectual property of all those U.S. defense contractors that supply what they specialize in to defense weapon system programs and other things like space programs that our adversaries want to steal. The idea here is that we need to rise up to protect the national security interests. So DFARS compliance and CMMC compliance is really not compliance just for compliance sake. It really is safeguarding the national security interest of our country, and with that, the war fighting capability of our troops downrange. What we need to protect here really does help protect the lives of our troops that are in harm's way around the world. This really does protect the future of our children and grandchildren, both in terms of security through warfighting capabilities and in maintaining the integrity of secrets found in intellectual property. One of the main objectives for this CMMC mandate is to report cybersecurity incidents within 72 hours, which is a very difficult thing to do. And if you are an IT person, you know that quite well. CUI is information that requires safeguarding or dissemination controls pursuant and consistent with applicable law, regulations, and government-wide policies, but is not classified under Executive Order 13526 or the Atomic Energy Act as amended. Through an executive order, the President consolidated all kinds of information into a single category that is unclassified but requires safeguarding or dissemination controls. The US government says we must protect this category called CUI, or Controlled Unclassified Information. When we handle it, possess it, use it, share it, receive it, or even create it, we must protect it. We create CUI when we create a subcomponent of a weapon system used on the F-35. That assembly may be ITAR controlled. It might be CUI, but that technical data needs to be distribution protected because it is not publicly available and requires protection, even though it's considered unclassified. Underneath CUI, or Controlled Unclassified Information, it really boils down to 24 categories of CUI. And you can go to the CUI registry, where you will find links to the different types of categories of CUI and their descriptions. For DFARS 7012 and CMMC, it really is all about the data. In DFARS 7012, the focus is on controlled unclassified information, but in CMMC, the focus is on controlled unclassified information and federal contract information. Let's talk a little bit about federal contract information first, since that is new to CMMC. It might be new to you as well. Federal contract information is the information that is not publicly available or intended for public release that is generated between the government and its prime contractors and subcontractors about the execution of a contract, and is not included in the technical data as a category of CUI is defined. Federal contract information could be anything. Federal contract information could be email exchanges about the program, general information about the testing, the general designs that are not technical in nature, or the capabilities of a particular manufactured part. FCI is not technically classified, but the government does not intend for it to be publicly released. Oftentimes, these kinds of discussions occur through email because that is our principal method of communicating these days. Under CMMC, federal contract information will come under scope with how you are safeguarding it. However, the way you must safeguard FCI does not have the same requirements when compared to how you safeguard CUI. Under CUI, there are two principal types that have been defined. They are Controlled Technical Information, or CTI, and ITAR. Controlled Technical Information has a few key things. It's technical information with a military or space application that is not publicly available, and it's focused on things like testing, engineering data, specifications, standards, manufacturing processes, assembly and usage manuals. All these things would fall under the Controlled Technical Information category. One thing to touch on, and we'll talk more about it later, is that Controlled Technical Information could fall under the terms of export control, which would be ITAR information that would fall under the EXPT category. You typically have two types of technical information in the DoD world, and they are Controlled Technical Information and Export Control Information. Both definitions are very similar. However, ITAR requirements are very technical and very punitive. If you handle ITAR information, you don't want to mess around by not protecting it. What aspects of a company's typical workflow would be impacted by CUI? Let's go over a few of them, starting with sales. So you're doing quotes and proposals to capture sales directly to the federal government, or maybe you are exchanging information with a subcontractor for a military or space application. All the technical information and specifications are considered CUI because that information is going into a military or space application. Even though the technical information and specifications may not be marked as CUI, it meets the definition of CUI and therefore must be handled as CUI. Sales and quoting is an aspect of business operations where you really need to be careful with how you are handling CUI, especially when exchanging information with people at events such as conventions and trade shows. If the information is technical in nature and associated with a military or space application and underneath a DoD contract, it most certainly is CUI. And it is specifically CTI, or it could even be ITAR. You need to be careful with what information you are exchanging and with whom you are exchanging the information with, especially if the information falls under ITAR. Receiving and planning. So you are a subcontractor and you receive a part and you use the engineering drawings to make it better. You take the part through an internal manufacturing process, or maybe you send it to a subcontractor for a specialized process and have to share the technical data with them. You might have to send the part somewhere outside of your company for stress testing or quality inspections to make sure it meets specifications. All that information required to produce the final assembly of that part is CUI. One thing that you need to clearly understand when dealing with CUI under a DoD contract is that you are responsible for ensuring whatever firm you outsource services to, where you have to send them mil-spec data, which is CUI, and not general commercial specifications in order for the work to be completed. That service provider will also need to be CMMC certified if they will be dealing with any aspect of the part if that part will be used in a military or space application underneath a DoD contract. So you may need to find companies that are certified to properly handle CUI. You may have to keep the data stored for certification purposes and archiving. That too is certainly CUI. Shipping and packaging requirements is also information that must be protected because it is CUI. IT infrastructure is impacted by this. How you manage the data digitally and physically is also impacted both in terms of CUI and FCI. So everything we have talked about is part of DFARS 7012. So if you're underneath the DFARS 7012 contract or subcontract, and it's flowed down in your terms and conditions, then you most certainly need to be compliant. That starts out with your risk and security assessment, and that is a yearly requirement. Your plan of actions and milestones, your POAMs, which you will need to complete in order to be CMMC compliant. Your POAM must be 100% complete and in conformity, and that is a very high standard. The third document is the System Security Plan, or SSP. So maybe you're under DFARS 7012 and maybe you aren't, but if you are performing on DoD contracts, you will have to be CMMC compliant. If you are not under the DFARS 7012 requirement right now, but you expect a process or product that you supply to the government would require you to exchange information with the government that the government does not want to be public knowledge, you will, at the very least, need to be CMMC level 1 certified. The CMMC level requirement depends on what kind of data you are exchanging. You're probably trying to figure out what CMMC level you should aim for, and it really is all about the data that you're working with. For example, if you're a company that provides welfare and morale support for a military base overseas, then that would constitute federal contract information and would require you to be level 1 CMMC certified because you would be providing a commercial service to a military post. If the data is defined as being technical and part of anything that pertains to a DoD contract, then you will need to be at CMMC maturity level 3 because you are dealing with CUI at that point. This next level is a gotcha that we as your PTAC are trying to get some additional clarification on. It has been stated by the director of the CMMC accreditation body that CMMC level 2 is not expected to be issued because it is thought as more of a transition level between levels 1 and 3. CMMC maturity level 2 basically just requires written documented policies and procedures that comprise 55 practices in addition to the 17 level 1 practices. But yeah, we were extremely surprised to hear that they don't expect to issue certifications for CMMC maturity level 2. The most important level for organizations under DFARS 7012 is CMMC maturity level 3. CMMC maturity level 3 covers 110 practices plus 20 additional cumulative practices that are not contained in NIST 800-171. For those of you that need to be at CMMC level 3, I encourage you to focus on the 110 practices in NIST 800-171 right now, because those are the most important. And getting those controls behind you will best position you for the 20 additional practices that are required for reaching CMMC level 3. CMMC maturity levels 4 and 5 are going to be very rare and aimed towards large prime contractors. Per the CMMC accreditation body, it is expected that only between 1 and 5% of the issued CMMC certifications will be for maturity levels 4 and 5. So really, the two principal maturity levels that are level 1 with FCI and level 3 with FCI and CUI. If you are doing DFAR 7012 right now, you need to laser focus on NIST 800-171 and those 110 practices. And one last thing here, I recommend that you strive to reach CMMC Maturity Level 3 because it will be a competitive advantage and minimize the number of DoD contract opportunities that are out of reach. Let's discuss some of the risks. Let's discuss some of the risk areas associated with the data, because that is what the government is trying to prevent from being vulnerable to a security breach. Here are the 5 high-risk areas that your employees have to apply the safeguard practices to for their jobs and workflow every single day. Organization facilities, sensitive data, which includes ITAR, CUI, and even company data like intellectual property. Sensitive documents, electronic and physical, must be safeguarded, whether they be ITAR, CUI, or company documents. Customer parts, absolutely. A part or representation of a part in a diagram or picture can absolutely represent technology transfer to a foreign adversary, or in an ITAR sense, constitute a deemed export. You don't want to do that, so you really need to carefully consider when you're displaying your parts at a trade show, especially if the displayed part is an accurate depiction of a part that goes into something like a F-35 or Abrams tank, or any military application for that matter. If the diagram for that part is CUI, then the representation of that part is CUI. It can be tricky, but just take that into account. All of this impacts company IT networks and devices. What the government wants to do is have you implement the technology controls and secure where and how the data flows. This includes the physical environment and the digital environment. The questions you always want to ask yourself are, where does the data flow? Who touches the data? What devices does the data traverse? And who do I need to share the data with in order to execute the requirements of the contract? Employees are your greatest resource and also your greatest liability. Employee errors, omissions, and behavior represent 90% of all cyber risk when it comes to breaches and unauthorized disclosure of protected data. It will be a requirement for your employees to understand how to properly handle FCI and CUI, as well as corporate sensitive data. Your employees will have to understand what they can and cannot do when it comes to handling protected data. Understanding policies and procedures are very important even now under DFAR 7012, and especially when moving forward with the CMMC requirements. Employers must restrict access to company facilities and sensitive data to only authorized people. So you will have to designate who is authorized and who isn't authorized to access FCI, CUI, and ITAR. Also, you'll have to consider how you control access to protected data when you have visitors. Remember, when you have a data compromise of any kind, you will need to report it. Also, remember that if you have a data breach, you are not only expected to report it to the government, you also have to report it to all the prime contractors and subcontractors that you're working under. Every single one of them has to be informed of the compromise of the data all the way up to DoD. This means that if you are a tier 14 subcontractor and have 13 subcontractors above you before you get to a prime contractor like BAE Systems, for example, then every one of the subcontractors must be notified about the breach before the bad news gets to the prime contractor and DoD. That's why it is so important for you to know who you are outsourcing manufacturing processes to. You do not want to be the one that has to say there was a data breach by your service provider, especially if your service provider was not certified to deal with the CUI. Remember that you are expected to notify everyone in the supply chain within 72 hours that there was a compromise of CUI. So why are we going through all of this? Why is NIST 800-171 required? The answer is because it's the law, period. It's the law underneath the Code of Federal Regulations. It's the law underneath DFARS, which governs the contract requirements of the Department of Defense, and soon it will be the law under the Federal Acquisition Regulation. So prime contractors and all their subcontractors are required to become compliant. Those terms are required to be passed down word for word. That's why CUI and FCI is such a big deal. It's because it impacts so many different organizations that are handling the technical data or even creating the technical data. If you are currently under DFAR 7012, then you may have received a notification like the one in the example, and you may have even replied and said, we think we are compliant, or we are working towards becoming compliant. The reality is that the CMMC requirement is headed your way, and you need to be compliant when it arrives. And I'll be honest with you, this is not an easy task, and it's going to take everyone in your organization to help you become compliant and to maintain compliance. And you really need to get this process started as soon as possible. Let's talk a little bit about Controlled Technical Information, or CTI, which is a category of Controlled Unclassified Information, or CUI. Controlled Technical Information. Controlled Technical Information is technical information with military or space application that is subject to controls on the use, access, reproduction, modification, performance, display, release, disclosure, or dissemination. Note, the term does not include information that is lawfully publicly available without restrictions. So what is technical information? Technical information includes research and engineering data, engineering drawings, associated lists, specifications, standards, process sheets, manuals, technical reports, technical orders, catalog item identifications, data sets, studies and analysis and related information, and computer software executable code, as well as the source code. Notice that I included an engineering diagram to the right of the definitions. I know you can't see it very well, but there is an engineering block located on the lower right side, and in that block there are markings for controls. There could be ITAR or export control distribution restrictions that you need to pay attention to, so you will know how to properly handle the controlled technical information. The reason for that is because when prime contractors are sending out these types of notifications, they are identifying what is and what is not controlled technical information, so that you will know what needs additional safeguarding measures. Here's an example of how prime contractors notify subcontractors that the project they are working on contains CUI, and just to be safe, primes may require you to prove that you are certified to handle CUI. As a subcontractor, you need to know that you will probably start seeing these types of notifications sent to you from your prime contractors, where they are asking you to send them your POAM and SSP within 7 days, or they may even send you a questionnaire that they want you to fill out. And of course, you're obligated to respond if you want to continue that relationship with them. As I mentioned, DFARS, Code of Federal Regulations, and ITAR are the government laws that mandate the safeguarding of CUI for businesses that are executing contracts with the government and DoD. You need to make sure that you're meeting the requirements because the penalties can be egregious, especially if you're dealing with ITAR controls. These laws mostly share the same common safeguarding requirements using NIST 800-171. You will find some additional unique requirements when dealing with ITAR when compared to the requirements of CTUI though, or CTI. CUI requirements impact these major areas: IT network and devices, your organizational workflows, policies and procedures, work instructions, data and document controls, part controls, physical security requirements, employee responsibilities, and of course, your outside processors and supply chains. I included this slide regarding export controlled information because EXPT constitutes about 50% of the type of CUI that most companies performing DoD contracts come into contact with. The controls for export controlled information are very technical. If you haven't paid much attention to the ITAR documents in your possession, this is the time to bring them into focus because there is a convergence. The CUI requirements underneath DFARS and also the ITAR requirements underneath DFARS for export controlled information need to be integrated. So things like your export control manual, your technology control plan, your sensitive data governance plan, which is going to be your principal document that defines how and why you handle CUI. All these things need to be interlocking because all those things are going to be the foundation for your 20 or 25 other policies that will need to be created and implemented within your organization. The policies need to be very detailed, and the reason for that is they guide you and ensure you are maintaining compliance. You need to be aware of how EXPT is properly marked so you can meet the legal requirements. So let's hit on CUI parts one more time. If a part is a physical representation of an engineering diagram and has unique military or space application under a DoD contract, then it's CUI. And that CUI part is definitely protected. For example, let's compare two different bolts. Bolt A is used in a Navy gun turret, and it keeps the gun turret anchored to the ship and has very unique specifications. Bolt B is almost the same and falls under the standard military specification, but it is used to anchor, I don't know, light poles, and you can get it on the public internet. Bolt A is CUI and controlled, while Bolt B is not CUI and not controlled. If a bolt has unique specifications and is used for an end system for military or space applications in a DoD contract, then it is CUI and specifically CTI and most likely ITAR. It must be protected. That includes the images of the bolt, sales brochures, marketing materials, and any specification data that could be used by our adversaries to replicate the part. CUI parts should be secured, controlled, and restricted from everyone that is not considered authorized trained personnel. Only eligible, qualified, and trained personnel should have access to possess, observe, handle, or receive CUI parts. This includes if you have to send the CUI part to another subcontractor for any additional processes in order to produce the final product. What's the big deal about CUI and marking? Marking is really important and part of all of this. You have to mark rooms where CUI is routinely used, and these areas must be designated and restricted. Cubicles where CUI is processed, created, or could be observed must have privacy screens. If you are an engineer that is working with CUI that's technical and used for developing a diagram or something, and you have other engineers working on commercial products, but don't work on military products, then they should not have access to that information, and that information needs to be restricted from them. Computers that are used to process, store, or create CUI should be marked with controlled. Non-digital media that contains CUI has to be labeled and locked. There are special handling requirements for shipping and mailing, such as you must address packages that contain CUI for delivery to a recipient that has been trained on how to properly handle CUI. There are other shipping and mailing requirements that we'll get into in the next webinar when we discuss how to properly handle CUI. So marking is mandated by DoD. Let's say you manufacture a part that goes into an end assembly for an Abrams tank or BAE weapon system. You will have unique specifications and engineering drawings that were used to make the part. So CUI not only applies to the part that goes into the weapon system, but the specifications and technical drawings are going to be CUI and must be protected. All these things have to be identified, designated, and marked at the time of creation. So if you are the engineer that creates the drawings that goes into the end assembly for the DoD contract, you have to mark that document with the correct DoD required markings. It has to be covered and concealed to keep others who are not on the DoD contract and not authorized with lawful government purpose for accessing that data. You can't just give them access just because they are your employee. That's just not the way it works. By definition, individuals have to have a lawful government purpose to handle CUI. You have to inventory it because those documents and parts are all CUI and controlled. As you can see from the stickers, you have to label CUI properly. You have to label the monitors that display CUI, the machines that process, create, and store CUI, and the areas that are associated with when working with CUI. They have to be properly designated and marked because it has to be clear to everyone where CUI is being used or created. This is because personnel and visitors may be restricted from entering those areas or using those machines because they are on the premises for your commercial program and not the DoD program. If this were the case, then in the areas where they might have access to FCI and CUI, they're going to have to be escorted so that they are not able to observe protected data, protected documents, or protected products. You're going to have to have control. You're going to have a controlled environment. So that is why there's a lot more to this than just cybersecurity. The entire organization is going to be impacted, and DoD wants clearly marked rooms that are locked, and you have to control access to who can enter those rooms. When CUI information is shared electronically, the data must be encrypted. There's no other way around it. All of this has to be monitored. You'll have to monitor who enters the facility and know who is in the workspaces to determine whether only the people that have access to CUI is accessing CUI. For example, you'll have to monitor access to the printer when it resides in a controlled space because CUI documents are printed out and they cannot be observed by someone else that printed a corporate document at the same time, but is able to get to the printer sooner. You know, they're going to get pretty detailed with this. There are shipping controls that must be followed. When you are ready to, whenever you are ready to destroy documents or devices that deal with CUI, they must be disposed of in a very specific manner. CUI cannot just be tossed in the trash can. It has to go into a locking bin waiting to be destroyed in an approved fashion. You know, this really is a complicated problem, but it is solvable without having to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. There are inexpensive ways to implement these critical workflow controls to meet the requirements. I know it seems daunting to get all of this done, especially if you're new to this, but I promise you, if you take it one piece at a time, it can be accomplished. When the CMMC accreditation body releases the official assessment guide, it will shed some light on all of this for all of us. And I promise that all of Tribal Government Institute's clients will receive the official assessment guide as soon as it becomes available for distribution to the defense industrial base. So that was pretty much everything that I wanted to talk about for this particular webinar. Here's a few key takeaways that I feel are important. The CMMC accreditation body is now open for business. The first step to meeting the requirements of DFARS 252.204-7012, which the first step is to meet those requirements, which includes the implementation of NIST 800-171. CMMC accreditation body will release the assessment guide in late September 2020 or in October 2020. Expect the rule for the CMMC requirement to be adopted by all federal agencies in the future, not just DoD. NIST 800-171A contains the core components of the material contained in the assessment guide. The CMMC will impact the entire organization, not just IT infrastructure. CMMC Level 2 is not expected to be issued per the CMMC accreditation body. We recommend to strive to reach CMMC Maturity Level 3 because it will be a competitive advantage and minimize the number of DoD contracts or just contracts in general that are out of reach. Laser focus on NIST 800-171 in those 110 practices, and that's something that you can start on now. CUI marking and physical access control to CUI areas is mandated by the Department of Defense. Okay, here I included some useful links. There's a link to the CMMC accreditation body, the official CMMC website, the CUI registry, the link to the only commercial company currently that provides CUI marking labels. There's DFARS 7012, and there are some NIST 800-171 sites, including the assessment guide. I included the link to where you report the cybersecurity incidents to DoD. And lastly, the link to DTC Global, which is who I recommend you using as an initial, or just consider them. You know, of course, you can use anybody that you would like. There are many companies that can provide this service. Just be sure to choose them wisely. The reason I included that link is because there's another company out there called DTC Global Services, and they're out of Florida. DTC Global is out of Texas, and DTC Global is, they do have people within that company that are on the official CMMC accreditation body. So, I mean, they're gonna get you there. So I'll be more than happy to take any questions anybody has. Let me see if I can find any. Looks like we have a few minutes here. Let's see some questions. seeing any. Okay, I'm not really seeing any questions, but remember, you know, we are here for you, so give us a call if you have any, you know, if you think of any questions. You know, we'll be more than happy to talk to you about any of this. We are going to continue this webinar series. We're going to talk about how to handle CUI in the next webinar, and we'll send you an invitation for that. Yeah, just thank you to everybody and have a great and safe day. Take care.